In the suburbs of Prince George's County, Maryland, the Allen family stood out as a picture of stability and respectability. They were not wealthy by any extraordinary measure, but they carried a reputation that made them pillars of their neighborhood. Gregory Allen, the 59-year-old patriarch, had spent decades building a modest contracting business that kept him steadily employed and respected among clients who knew him for his reliability. He was hands-on, often seen at construction sites in his work boots, and among church members he was admired not just for his craftsmanship but for his willingness to help anyone in need. His wife, Cheryl Allen, 57, brought a different but equally valued contribution to both family and community. She ran a small daycare out of their home, a service many working parents in the area depended on. Cheryl was known for her warmth, her discipline with children, and her strong voice in the church choir. Together, Gregory and Cheryl cultivated an environment that blended hard work, faith, and generosity. Neighbors routinely described the Allens as the family who had it together, approachable, reliable, and close-knit. The couple's 3 children carried forward that sense of responsibility and pride. Their eldest son, Darrell Allen, 32, had served in the U.S. Army and transitioned into a career as a private security consultant after his service. His military background gave him a protective nature, especially when it came to his younger sisters. Friends recalled that Darrell was the one who always checked in on family matters, taking his role as the older brother seriously. In gatherings, he carried himself with quiet confidence, and among church members, he was recognized as a man shaped by discipline and loyalty. The middle child, Tiana Allen, 26, pursued a career in nursing. She had been drawn to caregiving from a young age, often assisting her mother with the daycare. After completing her nursing degree, she found work in a local hospital where her colleagues described her as compassionate and reliable. Tiana was close with both her parents and siblings, often coming by the family home for dinner after long shifts. In her church circle, she was seen as gentle but ambitious, someone on track to do well in both her career and personal life. The youngest, Kayla Allen, 18, was just stepping into adulthood. A recent high school graduate, she was beginning her freshman year at college with plans to study communications. Friends described her as vibrant and intelligent, the kind of young woman who balanced humor with a maturity beyond her years. Kayla had been raised with her parents' values but also reflected the energy of her generation, active on social media, outspoken among her peers, and always eager to try new things. To her older brother and sister, she was the one they still felt protective of, though she was quickly making her own way in the world. Together, the Allens were deeply embedded in their community. Sundays were reserved for church, where Gregory served as a deacon and Cheryl was a fixture in the choir. Their home doubled as a gathering place, not just for extended family but for neighbors who trusted Cheryl's daycare or sought Gregory's advice on household repairs. Over years of steady presence, they earned respect not through prestige or wealth, but through the consistency of their example. To friends and church members, the family seemed unshakable, the kind of unit others aspired to emulate. No one could have predicted that within a few years, their bonds would be tested in the most devastating way imaginable. In late 2022, Tiana Allen attended a local health fair organized at a community center in Prince George's County. It was the kind of event she often supported as a young nurse: screenings, wellness booths, and information stands. Among the volunteers and exhibitors was Damonte Evans, a 28-year-old IT technician who said he was helping a small clinic set up their digital check-in system. He wasn't part of the medical side of the fair, but he stood out for his confidence and easy charm. Damonte introduced himself to Tiana while she was on break, making conversation about how technology and healthcare were beginning to overlap. He told her he had grown up in Baltimore, had lost his parents young, and had worked hard to build a career in IT on his own. He presented himself as ambitious and focused, a man who understood responsibility despite a difficult start. To Tiana, who was accustomed to long hours of care work, his attention and respect felt refreshing. Their exchange at the fair turned into a first date not long after. By the start of 2023, their relationship had quickly deepened. Damonte was attentive, picking Tiana up from her shifts, sending meals to her workplace, and involving himself in her routines in a way that made her feel supported. He emphasized how much he valued family, pointing to the Allens as the kind of stability he had always wished for. When he was first introduced to the family, Damonte's charm made an impression. Cheryl Allen welcomed him warmly, appreciating his politeness and willingness to help around the house. Kayla, just starting her freshman year in college, found him easy to talk to. On the surface, he blended in well. But not everyone was fully convinced. Gregory Allen thought Damonte was vague about his actual employment. His answers about clients and contracts seemed practiced, and he noticed the young man often shifted topics when pressed. Daryl Allen, with his security background and protective instincts, was cautious from the beginning. He described Damonte to a friend as someone who looked the part but didn't add up. Despite these concerns, Damonte remained consistent in his courtship. He began attending church with the family, participated in Sunday dinners, and continued presenting himself as dependable. For Tiana, the whirlwind pace of their relationship felt natural, even exciting. Within months, conversations had already turned toward marriage. By mid-2023, it was clear to those around her that Tiana was deeply committed. Family friends noticed how often Damonte was present at Allen family gatherings, as if he had always belonged. For Gregory and Daryl, unease lingered, but without concrete proof of wrongdoing, their concerns remained private. Tiana saw only what Damonte showed her, a man eager to build a life together. The health fair meeting that had seemed casual at first had grown into something far larger. Less than a year later, the Allens would find themselves welcoming Damonte not just as a visitor, but as a future member of the family. On August 12, 2023, family and friends gathered at the Allens church to witness the marriage of Tiana Allen and Damonte Evans. The sanctuary was filled with emotion, music, and pride. For Gregory and Cheryl, it was a milestone to see their middle child walk down the aisle. Guests remembered Tiana's smile, her white gown, and the tears in Cheryl's eyes as vows were exchanged. On the surface, the day carried the look of joy and promise. Yet beneath the celebration were moments that in hindsight raised concerns. One of the most significant came the evening before the ceremony. Daryl Allen, protective as always, confronted Damonte privately. According to what he later confided to a close friend, Daryl told him directly that if he ever mistreated Tiana or took advantage of her, he would have to answer for it. Witnesses recalled seeing Damonte afterward, visibly tense, his usual charm stripped away for a brief moment. During the wedding preparations, another incident unsettled those close by. A bridesmaid reported overhearing a heated exchange between Daryl and Damonte. Though the words weren't entirely clear, the tone suggested friction. The bridesmaid kept it to herself at the time, thinking it was typical wedding day nerves or sibling protectiveness, but later described it as the first sign that the new groom might not have been fully accepted by everyone. The most unusual disruption came during the reception. A young woman, later identified as Shanae Morgan, arrived uninvited and attempted to approach Gregory and Cheryl Allen. Guests said she looked agitated and determined to speak. Before she could explain her presence, Damonte intercepted her quickly, pulling her aside and ushering her out of the venue. He later told Tiana and her parents that Shanae was simply an ex-girlfriend who had trouble letting go, dismissing her appearance as nothing more than bitter jealousy. To avoid embarrassment on Tiana's wedding day, the family accepted his explanation, choosing not to press further. With food, music, and laughter filling the hall, those troubling moments were buried under the weight of the celebration. The Allens, wanting to trust Tiana's choice, looked past the red flags. By the end of the evening, Damonte was embraced formally as a new member of the family. The photographs captured smiles, embraces, and dancing, images that painted the day as a milestone of joy. No one could know then that the same day marked the beginning of a bond that would unravel their entire household only weeks later. The weeks following the August 2023 wedding brought a shift in the Allen household's perception of their new in-law. While Tiana was still caught up in the glow of newlywed life, Damonte Evans began showing a different side, one that raised quiet concerns for Gregory and Cheryl. Within days of the ceremony, Damonte started pressing Tiana about financial arrangements. He suggested they should merge their accounts immediately, urging her to add him as a joint owner on her savings. He also brought up life insurance more than once, insisting that a newly married couple needed to prepare for any possibility. He spoke of wanting a substantial policy in her name, emphasizing that it was a step of security. For Cheryl, who overheard her daughter mention these conversations, the urgency seemed unusual. It was rare for a young couple just days into marriage to focus so heavily on policies and coverage. While Cheryl grew uneasy at home, Gregory encountered his own red flag. A former business acquaintance who had attended the wedding reached out with a troubling observation. The man told Gregory that he recognized Damonte's name from a case in Baltimore a few years earlier involving financial misconduct. According to his recollection, an employee named Damonte Evans had been investigated for embezzlement at a tech company, accused of redirecting funds through company accounts. The case hadn't led to a conviction, but the man was certain it had been in the local news at the time. This information weighed heavily on Gregory. He had built his life and reputation on hard work and honesty, and the thought that his daughter's new husband might be tied to financial crime disturbed him. He began checking into Damonte's work history, looking at public records and online profiles. The details didn't align neatly. There were gaps in employment dates, vague descriptions of his supposed consulting business, and no clear evidence of long-term stability. These discoveries did not immediately reach Tiana. At this stage, Gregory and Cheryl were cautious. They were protective parents but also wary of making accusations without proof. Tiana was still speaking of Damonte with pride and affection, telling her mother how supportive he had been and how eager he was to build their future. To her, these discussions about money and insurance seemed like signs of responsibility. For Cheryl, however, the picture forming was different. The pattern of urgency and control reminded her of warnings she had heard in church groups and community workshops about financial abuse in marriages. Combined with Gregory's phone call from his colleague, it was becoming harder to dismiss the doubts. By the end of August, the honeymoon glow that had surrounded the wedding had dimmed. Gregory and Cheryl were increasingly aware that something about Damonte did not add up. Though they hadn't yet voiced all of their suspicions to Tiana, the unease was no longer a passing feeling. The Allens began quietly preparing to look deeper into their new son-in-law's past. As August 2023 wore on, the Allen family's unease with Damonte Evans deepened. What had started as gut feelings and stray warnings began to take shape when Daryl Allen, drawing on his military and security background, decided to make inquiries of his own. Using informal contacts in the private security and law enforcement community, Daryl ran quiet checks into Damonte's history. The results confirmed his suspicions. Records showed Damonte had been named in multiple civil lawsuits over the past several years, including cases tied to unpaid debts and defaulted loans. There was also a troubling record of domestic disturbance complaints, one of which had led to a restraining order filed by none other than Shanae Morgan, the woman who had attempted to warn the Allens at the wedding reception. In her filings, Shanae accused Damonte of violence and of draining funds from her accounts during their relationship. Though the case hadn't led to criminal charges, it added a disturbing layer to his background. At the same time, Gregory Allen took his own approach. He began reviewing Damonte's supposed work history and found it riddled with inconsistencies. The IT consulting business Damonte claimed to operate had no formal registration prior to mid-2023, just months before the wedding. Online profiles contained overlapping or missing employment dates. References to past companies did not line up with public records. For a man who presented himself as ambitious and accomplished, there was little verifiable evidence to support his story. Meanwhile, Cheryl Allen noticed the effect Damonte's pressure was beginning to have on her daughter. Tiana spoke frequently about his insistence on joint accounts and life insurance policies, framing it as financial planning. Cheryl, concerned by both the timing and intensity of these demands, began gently encouraging her daughter to slow down. She urged Tiana to wait before signing anything binding and to maintain her independence, even as a newlywed. By the end of the month, Gregory, Cheryl, and Daryl were sharing what they had each uncovered. The picture was becoming clear. Damonte was hiding a troubled past that included debt, lawsuits, and a pattern of controlling behavior. Though they kept these discussions between themselves at first, all agreed that protecting Tiana meant confronting the truth directly. The Allen family, once eager to trust and embrace their new son-in-law, now faced the reality that the man at their table might be a threat to the very stability they had worked decades to build. By the final week of August 2023, the unease inside the Allen household had reached a point where silence was no longer an option. Gregory, Cheryl, and Daryl Allen had each uncovered troubling pieces of information about Damonte Evans, and together those details painted a picture that could not be ignored. Civil lawsuits, debt, a restraining order from his ex-girlfriend, and inconsistencies in his work history now stood in stark contrast to the image of ambition and stability he had presented. The family chose not to alarm Tiana immediately. For them, the priority was keeping her safe and confronting Damonte in a controlled environment where they could present what they knew. After quiet discussions among themselves, they decided the best approach was to invite Damonte and Tiana to a family dinner under the guise of bonding. On the surface, it would look like a gathering meant to celebrate Tiana's new marriage. In truth, it was an intervention designed to put questions directly to Damonte, face to face. The planning carried a layer of tension. Gregory spoke with Cheryl about how to keep the evening calm, stressing that accusations alone might drive Tiana further into defending her husband. Cheryl emphasized approaching it with caution, beginning with questions rather than outright confrontation. Daryl, however, felt less inclined to soften the blow. His protective instincts and the weight of what he had found left him determined to hold Damonte accountable. On the day of the planned dinner, the family carried the appearance of normalcy, but privately they braced for what was to come. Tiana, unaware of the full extent of her parents' and brothers' concerns, saw the invitation as another show of support from her family. Damonte agreed to attend, likely expecting nothing more than a meal and conversation. Behind closed doors, though, the Allens' conversations revolved around a single theme: protecting Tiana before it was too late. They believed Damonte's urgency around finances, his concealed past, and his history of abusive behavior marked him as dangerous. What they did not yet know was how high the stakes of their decision would become once the confrontation began. On the evening of August 26, 2023, the Allen family gathered for what appeared to be a routine dinner at their home. In reality, it was the confrontation they had carefully planned. Gregory Allen, joined by his wife Cheryl and their eldest son Daryl, intended to question Damonte Evans about the troubling discoveries they had uncovered. After dinner plates were cleared, Gregory asked Damonte to join him in the study. Cheryl and Daryl followed, leaving Tiana and Kayla in the living room. Once inside, Gregory began to raise the inconsistencies in Damonte's work history, referencing the call he had received from a colleague about a past embezzlement case. Cheryl mentioned the unusual urgency Damonte had shown about life insurance. Daryl added what he had uncovered about the civil lawsuits and restraining order. Witnesses would later reconstruct the scene through Tiana's account. The voices from the study quickly escalated. Damonte grew defensive, raising his voice and accusing the family of trying to turn Tiana against him. When Gregory pressed harder, suggesting that what they knew could be taken to the authorities, Damonte's anger boiled over. He stormed out of the room and left the house. For a moment, the Allens believed he had left to cool off. In reality, Damonte went to his car, retrieved a 9mm handgun he had purchased days earlier, and returned. As he re-entered the house, Daryl noticed the weapon concealed at his side. His warning shout alerted Kayla upstairs, who dialed 911 in panic at 7:43 p.m. The dispatcher recorded screams and raised voices before the line cut off. When officers responded to the incomplete 911 call from the Allen residence on the evening of August 26, 2023, they arrived to a scene of devastation. Inside the home they found Gregory and Cheryl Allen shot in the study, Daryl Allen dead in the doorway, and Kayla Allen mortally wounded on the stairs. The only surviving family member was Tiana, who was still in shock as she clutched her sister when first responders reached her. Between sobs, she told police that the shooter was her husband, Damonte Evans. Investigators immediately began documenting the crime scene. Shell casings recovered from the floors matched the caliber of a handgun recently purchased under Damonte's name. The absence of forced entry or any sign of a burglary eliminated the possibility of an outside intruder. Valuables remained untouched, further confirming this was not a robbery but a targeted attack. As officers canvassed the neighborhood, they obtained surveillance footage from a home security camera across the street. The footage showed Damonte's black SUV speeding away from the Allen residence moments after neighbors reported hearing gunfire. That evidence, paired with Tiana's direct identification of him as the shooter, gave police a clear suspect within hours. With Damonte on the run, law enforcement agencies launched an immediate manhunt. Bulletins were circulated statewide describing him as armed and extremely dangerous. His photograph, vehicle description, and license plate number were broadcast to surrounding jurisdictions. Patrols were alerted to be on high alert, and federal authorities were contacted in case he attempted to leave the state. By midnight, the Allen home was sealed off with yellow tape as forensic teams continued their work inside. Outside, neighbors gathered in disbelief at what had unfolded in the quiet Maryland suburb. Inside police headquarters, the urgency was clear. A man who had just annihilated his wife's family was at large, and every hour he remained free raised the risk of further violence. The case that had begun as a family intervention gone wrong had now escalated into a full-scale fugitive pursuit. Investigators knew the next 48 hours would be critical in tracking down Damonte Evans before he could disappear completely. As the manhunt for Damonte Evans unfolded, investigators began piecing together the background that the Allen family had only partially uncovered. What emerged was a trail of deception and instability that explained why the confrontation on August 26 had turned deadly. Detectives confirmed that Damonte had once worked for a Baltimore-based tech company where, in 2020, he was implicated in an embezzlement scandal. Though prosecutors had been unable to secure a conviction, internal company records and media coverage at the time alleged that Damonte exploited his access to financial systems to siphon money. The case had ended without charges, but the stigma followed him. Since then, he had struggled to hold consistent employment and had quietly built up a record of civil lawsuits for unpaid debts. Creditors had pursued him in small claims courts for thousands of dollars, leaving him in deep financial trouble. Further evidence pointed to new schemes unfolding even after his marriage to Tiana. Forensic accountants assisting detectives discovered forged financial documents with Tiana's signature copied onto insurance forms. Days after the wedding, Damonte had submitted an application for a large life insurance policy in Tiana's name, designating himself as beneficiary. Investigators noted the speed of that application as highly suspicious, showing that financial gain was a pressing motive from the beginning of the marriage. Alongside these paper trails came testimony from Shanae Morgan, the former girlfriend who had tried unsuccessfully to warn the Allens at the wedding reception. When contacted by detectives, she provided a copy of the restraining order she had filed against Damonte 2 years earlier, citing threats, physical aggression, and missing money from her accounts. Shanae revealed that on the night of the murders, just minutes after shots were fired in the Allen home, Damonte called her phone. Terrified, she answered briefly and he said, "They knew. I did what I had to do." She hung up immediately and later gave a statement to police, adding another piece of direct evidence linking him to the killings. Together, these discoveries painted a clear picture. Damonte Evans was a man drowning in financial failure, desperate for control, and willing to eliminate anyone who threatened to expose him. The Allen family had not simply misjudged him, they had come dangerously close to uncovering the full scope of his lies, and he responded by trying to erase them. The manhunt for Damonte Evans ended 2 days after the murders. Working with local law enforcement, U.S. Marshals traced his movements using cell phone pings and tips from contacts who had seen his black SUV traveling south. By the evening of August 28, 2023, they located him at a cousin's apartment complex in Richmond, Virginia. When officers moved in, Damonte was found with packed bags and a wallet containing Tiana's credit card, which he had attempted to use in the hours after fleeing Maryland. He surrendered without incident, but the items he carried painted a picture of a man preparing to escape and possibly assume a new identity. Back in Maryland, forensic investigators were already assembling the evidence. The 9mm handgun recovered from a dumpster near Baltimore was conclusively matched to the shell casings and bullets taken from the Allen crime scene. Alongside it were the burned remnants of clothing soaked in blood, which DNA testing confirmed belonged to members of the Allen family. With the combination of eyewitness identification from Tiana, the surveillance footage of his SUV leaving the neighborhood, the forensic matches, and the phone call testimony provided by Shanae Morgan, prosecutors had little hesitation in moving forward. Within 24 hours of his arrest, Damonte Evans was formally charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 for each member of the Allen family he had killed. Additional charges were filed for firearm use in a violent crime and for attempted financial fraud tied to the forged insurance applications discovered after the fact. The arrest brought a brief sense of relief to a community still reeling from the scale of the violence. For the surviving family members, particularly Tiana, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that would play out in the courtroom as the full extent of Damonte's lies and motives were laid bare. By the spring of 2024, the case against Damonte Evans moved into the courtroom. Prosecutors presented the killings as calculated acts, not an emotional outburst. They argued that Damonte murdered Gregory, Cheryl, Daryl, and Kayla Allen to silence them after they confronted him about his lies and financial schemes. The narrative they laid out showed a man on the brink of exposure who chose murder as a way to protect himself. The state introduced a wide range of evidence. The 9mm handgun matched to the shell casings and bullets, burned clothing with Allen family DNA, surveillance footage of his SUV leaving the neighborhood, and the forged life insurance application in Tiana's name. Financial records detailed his history of debts, lawsuits, and the failed embezzlement case in Baltimore. Testimony was a pivotal part of the trial. Tiana Evans, now widowed of her family, took the stand to identify her husband as the shooter. She recounted the night of August 26th, describing the moment Daryl shouted a warning, the gunfire that followed, and her last memory of holding Kayla as she died. Her testimony was delivered with composure, though the courtroom was silent as she spoke. Shanae Morgan, Damonte's ex-girlfriend, testified about their relationship. She described years of manipulation, threats, and financial exploitation, supported by the restraining order she had filed against him. She also relayed the phone call she received just minutes after the murders, where Damonte told her, "They knew. I did what I had to do." The defense attempted to reframe the case, arguing that Damonte acted in a moment of panic and mental collapse when confronted by the Allens. They cited his troubled upbringing and claimed he had never intended to kill, but their arguments failed to counter the prosecution's evidence of premeditation, the handgun purchased days earlier, the forged insurance documents, and the deliberate steps he took to destroy evidence. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 2 days. On all counts, including 4 charges of first-degree murder, Damonte Evans was found guilty. The sentencing hearing brought raw emotion into the courtroom. Victim impact statements were delivered by extended family members, neighbors, and most powerfully by Tiana. She told the court that Damonte had not only destroyed her parents, her brother, and her sister, but had robbed her of the foundation of her life. She spoke directly to him, saying she would carry the memory of her family, while he would carry the weight of what he had done. The judge described the murders as cold-blooded and calculated, calling it one of the most disturbing cases of family annihilation the county had ever seen. Citing the overwhelming evidence and the vulnerability of the victims, the court imposed the maximum penalty available, life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the Allen family's community, the sentence brought a measure of closure but no true healing. A memorial service was held at the family's church, the same place where Tiana's wedding had taken place only weeks before the murders. Photographs of Gregory, Cheryl, Daryl, and Kayla were displayed at the altar, a stark reminder of what had been lost. In the months following the trial, Tiana began rebuilding her life with the support of extended relatives. She also began working with advocacy groups focused on domestic violence and financial exploitation, determined to use her family's story as a warning for others. The case of Damonte Evans and the Allen family left a permanent mark on the community, a reminder that even in seemingly stable homes, betrayal can come from within, and that vigilance is sometimes the only safeguard against hidden dangers.